The news of humanity's victory spread across the galaxy like wildfire, carried by traders and diplomats and travelers who could barely believe what they were hearing. And the Vrelnox hierarchy, which was one of the Council's most powerful military forces, had been defeated by a species the galaxy had dismissed as too fragile to matter. On the Zeltharian homeworld, where floating cities drifted in vast oceans, the news caused heated debate, and Ambassador Lurum, who had argued so strongly for denying humanity's petition, now faced uncomfortable questions from the High Council. The Council speaker pulsed in angry crimson patterns and said that Lurum had assured them humanity posed no threat, and their technology was primitive and military capacity was negligible. Yet they had destroyed 13 Vrelnox capital ships and unveiled weapon systems that surpassed anything in galactic databases. Lurum's bioluminescence flickered with distress and said that their intelligence had been accurate, based on what humanity showed them, and humans had concealed their true capabilities, which was deception. Another council member interjected and said perhaps it was wisdom instead, because maybe humans understood that in a galaxy, judging species by military strength, revealing weakness was dangerous, and they played the role assigned to them while preparing for inevitable conflict. The speaker declared that the question now was what to do next, because the Vrelnox would not accept this humiliation and would regroup and attack again, likely with allies, and if the council did nothing they risked a wider war, and this time they could not assume humanity would lose. Across the galaxy, similar conversations were taking place, and species that had remained neutral during the initial vote now reconsidered their positions, and the Corvathians in particular found themselves in a difficult situation. General Vaxer stood before the Corvathian War Council, and his copper scales gleamed under harsh lights, and he said the humans had demonstrated tactical sophistication that exceeded projections, and the use of terrain and deception and unconventional weapons suggested a military tradition far more developed than their short history indicated. One of the war clan leaders objected and said humans were still inferior in numbers, and the Vrelnox fleet had been overconfident and made tactical errors, and against a prepared opponent, humanity would fail. Vaxor challenged this and asked if they would fail, and pointed out that humans turned their moon into a weapon and hid an entire fleet in an asteroid belt, and developed new weapon technology in secret, while presenting themselves as technologically backward. He said these were not the actions of a weak species, but of a dangerous one, and reminded the council that Corvathians had voted against humanity's petition, and if the Vrelnox formed a coalition for revenge, humanity would remember who stood with them and who did not. In the human embassy on the council station, Ambassador Daniel Carter suddenly found himself in high demand, and species that had barely acknowledged his presence now sought meetings, and trade offers flooded in, and requests for technology exchanges, and defense pacts and cultural exchanges filled his message queue. Lieutenant Amy Rogers looked overwhelmed sorting through communications and told Daniel they had received 47 formal meeting requests in the past 8 hours, and the Peltharian delegation wanted to discuss military cooperation, and the Minovan Collective was offering trade concessions, and even the Zeltharians requested a private meeting. Daniel smiled grimly and said fear and respect were what had changed, and before the aliens saw humans as fragile, but now they saw them as dangerous, and it was not the reputation he would have chosen, but it was the one they had. Amy asked if he thought the council would approve their petition now, and Daniel said they would approve something, but whether it was full membership with equal rights or some kind of restricted status meant to contain them remained to be seen. He paused, looking out at the vast station housing thousands of species from across the galaxy, and told Amy they needed to be careful because they won this battle, but revealed their hand, and now everyone knew what humans were capable of, including their enemies. On Earth, the aftermath of the battle was a mixture of celebration and grim preparation, and cities around the world held impromptu festivals honoring the fleet's victory. But in military command centers and government offices, leaders knew the truth that the war was far from over. President Jennifer Walsh stood in the Oval Office video conferencing with Admiral Patricia Morrison and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and she said Patricia's victory was remarkable, but intelligence reports suggested the Vrelnox were already mobilizing a larger fleet. Jennifer said the Vrelnox were calling for allies and demanding the Council sanction humanity for an unprovoked attack, and Patricia replied that it was hardly unprovoked, because the aliens invaded their system with overwhelming force, intending to subjugate Earth, and humans simply defended themselves. Jennifer agreed, but said that was not how the Vrelnoks were portraying it, and they were claiming humans used experimental weapons in violation of galactic warfare conventions, and saying humans fired first in the asteroid belt. Patricia pointed out that humans did fire first after the Vrelnoks destroyed 200 satellites and were advancing on Earth with clear hostile intent, and any court would call that self-defense. Jennifer said any human court, yes, but they were not dealing with human law but galactic politics, and the Vrelnoks had been playing that game for thousands of years. General Marcus Webb, who was chairman of the Joint Chiefs, leaned forward and said, with respect, that galactic politics would not matter if they were all dead, and the Vrelnoks would not stop with legal maneuvering, but would come at them again harder, and they needed to be ready. Jennifer said firmly, that was why they needed allies, and real ones, not fair-weather friends who would abandon them the moment the Vrelnoks made credible threats. And she asked Patricia about the status of outreach to other species. Patricia said, Ambassador Carter was working on it, but progress was slow because most species were afraid of picking sides, and the Vrelnoks hierarchy controlled key trade routes and had military alliances with half a dozen major powers, and standing with humanity meant risking their wrath. Jennifer said, then they needed to show the galaxy that standing with humanity was worth that risk, and asked her Secretary of State what assets they had and what they could offer that the Vrelnoks could not. Secretary Martin Hughes pulled up a holographic display and said technology for starters, and the Aegis cannon was impressive but not their only innovation, and they had made breakthroughs in fusion power and quantum computing and medical technology, and pharmaceutical research alone could revolutionize healthcare for dozens of species. Patricia looked intrigued and asked about medical technology, and Martin explained that a research team at Johns Hopkins had been working on regenerative therapy and successfully regrew damaged organs and nerve tissue in human subjects, and if they could adapt the treatment for other species, they would be offering something unique. He said most advanced species had technology preventing injury, but few had mastered healing after catastrophic damage, and Jennifer nodded slowly, saying this was because they never needed to, and they had shields and advanced armor and medical technology preventing most injuries. Jennifer said, but humans had been breaking bones and suffering wounds for thousands of years and got good at healing, because they had to. And Martin said exactly, and there was another angle because human AI research focused heavily on ethics and control. He explained that humans had been terrified of creating something they could not manage, and most galactic AI systems were far more advanced in processing power, but lacked the sophisticated ethical frameworks humans developed, and in a galaxy where AI rebellion was a recurring problem, they could offer solutions. Jennifer mused that they would position themselves as problem solvers and species that survived, despite being fragile, and developed unique solutions to universal problems as a result. Patricia admitted it could work, but they needed time to make these overtures, and she was not sure the Vrelnoks would give them that time, because intelligence suggested they were forming a coalition, and if they came with 20 nations backing them all, the healing technology in the galaxy would not save humanity. Across the galaxy in the ornate chambers of the Vrelnoks War Council, High Coordinator Tharvex addressed assembled representatives of the hierarchy's allies, and its mandibles were spread in aggressive display, and its voice resonated with carefully controlled fury. Tharvex said the humans had humiliated them, and destroyed their fleet and killed thousands of warriors, and now paraded their victory across the galaxy like triumphant savages, and this could not stand. The Draconid ambassador interjected and said, the humans claimed self-defense and the Vrelnoks fleet did enter their system with hostile intent. Tharvex countered that this came after humans attacked Vrelnoks vessels in the Kepler system and interfered in hierarchy territory and rescued refugees they had legitimate claims to and fired upon their ships, and everything that followed was in response to human aggression. The Minivan representative noted that the response included threatening to subjugate an entire homeworld, and the optics were not in the hierarchy's favor. Tharvex's voice turned cold and asked since when the hierarchy cared about optics, and said they cared about order and maintaining power. The Vrelnoks coalition fleet gathered at a staging point called Nexus Prime, which was a military station on the border of hierarchy space, and 200 warships from 7 different species formed the largest armada assembled in living memory. And High Coordinator Tharvek stood aboard the super dreadnought Absolute Dominion, watching the fleet organize with grim satisfaction. Tharvex declared that humans would not repeat their victory, and they had learned from mistakes, and their approach would be methodical with sound tactics, and they would enter the Sol system from 3 different directions, dividing human defensive attention. The plan included automated drones sweeping the asteroid belt, clean of hidden ships and long-range bombardment targeting the moon weapon, before closing to medium range, and maintaining strict formation discipline with no ship advancing alone, and no commander making decisions without coordination. Commander Kelvex, who had survived the first battle, added analysis, saying humans relied on deception and terrain advantages, and they would deny both. And this would be a conventional engagement fought by conventional rules. And in such a battle, numbers mattered, and humans had perhaps 25 ships while the coalition had 200. The fleet began its advance toward human space and in command centers across the galaxy. Species both allied and neutral watched with anticipation and dread, because this would determine the future balance of power in the entire galaxy. On Earth, the Situation Room beneath the Rocky Mountains was controlled chaos, and Admiral Patricia Morrison stood at the central display showing the incoming Vrelnox fleet in real time, and the numbers were stark and undeniable. General Marcus Webb said flatly that 200 ships were coming, and even with the Aegis cannon and perfect tactics, they could not win this fight, and Patricia replied, then they would not fight it, at least not the way the enemy expected. She pulled up a tactical overlay showing not the Sol system but a dozen different systems surrounding it, and said the Vrelnox were preparing for the Battle of Earth, so humans would not give it to them, and they were going to do something no species had done in 10,000 years of galactic warfare. Patricia said they were going to evacuate their homeworld, and the room erupted in protests, and an officer said they could not evacuate 7 billion people because they did not have the ships or time or resources. Patricia clarified they did not need to evacuate everyone, but just enough to ensure survival of the species, and 2 million people carefully selected for genetic diversity and skills, and potential would be distributed across 30 hidden colonies in systems the Vrelnox did not control. She explained these would be underground facilities on worlds too harsh for most species to consider worth conquering, and even if Earth fell, humanity would survive, and an aide asked quietly, what happened to the rest of them? Patricia said they would stay and fight, but not a conventional battle, and instead something the Vrelnox would not anticipate because they would turn Earth into the biggest trap in history. Ambassador Daniel Carter stood in the Galactic Council chambers addressing an emergency session called to address the impending conflict, and the gallery was packed with representatives from hundreds of species, all waiting to see what the human would say. Daniel began by saying he stood before them not to ask for military assistance, though they could certainly use it, but to ask a different question, which was what kind of galaxy they wanted to live in. He gestured to the holographic display showing the Vrelnox fleet and said that Armada represented the old order, where might makes right and powerful species dictate terms to weaker ones, and the only law that matters is the law of force. Daniel said if humanity falls, that message becomes clear to every species in the chamber, that resisting the powerful means destruction, and the Zeltharian ambassador pulsed with agitation and said the Vrelnox claimed they were responding to human aggression and had laws and treaties on their side. Daniel challenged this and asked if they really did, because the Vrelnox invaded human space with overwhelming force intending to subjugate their homeworld, and when humans defended themselves, the aliens cried foul. He pointed out that Vrelnox claimed humans used prohibited weapons, but there was no galactic law against defensive technology, and they claimed humans fired first in Kepler, but conveniently ignored that humans were rescuing refugees from genocide. Daniel said the Vrelnox did not represent law but tyranny dressed in legal language, and the Corvathian ambassador Rexor rumbled that these were beautiful words, but words did not stop warships, and if Daniel was asking for military support, the Council could not authorize direct intervention. Daniel said he was not asking for military support but something more powerful, which was truth, and humanity was fighting not just for survival but for a principle. He said humans believed a species' worth should not be measured solely by military. Power and fragility was not weakness but a different kind of strength, and the galaxy had room for diversity, and for species solving problems in unexpected ways. Daniel paused, meeting the eyes of delegates across the chamber, and said, "But if they were wrong and the galaxy truly belonged only to the strong, then let the Vrelnox destroy humanity and establish their precedent, and then see how long before other species found themselves on the wrong side of the natural order definition." Daniel sat down to silence, and then slowly one species representative stood, and it was the Peltharian ambassador whose people had been rescued by humanity from Kepler, and in a soft musical voice said, "Earth gave shelter when no one else would help." The Peltharians said they were not warriors and had no fleet to offer, but they had something else which was truth, and they would not be silent about what humanity had done for them. One by one, other species stood, including the Minivans and Telkari, and Brentian Collective and all were smaller powers who had felt the weight of stronger nations pressing down. And they could not offer military support, but could offer their voices and moral support, and refusal to accept the narrative that humanity deserved destruction. The Vrelnox fleet entered the Sol system in perfect formation, with their approach cautious and methodical, and they swept the asteroid belt with drone swarms, finding nothing but empty space and abandoned mining stations, and they detected no ship, signatures or hidden defenses or signs of ambush tactics. Commander Kelvex transmitted to the fleet that something was wrong because the humans were too quiet, and Tharvex replied that humans had learned they could not win and were hiding on their homeworld, hoping for mercy, and ordered all ships to advance to Earth orbit maintaining formation. As the fleet approached Mars, they discovered something that made even Tharvex hesitate, because Earth's moon, which had housed the Aegis cannon, was gone, and not destroyed, but completely gone, and in its place was an expanding cloud of debris with millions of tons of lunar rock and equipment scattered in a ring around Earth. Kelvex could not hide confusion and asked why humans would destroy their own weapon, and Tharvex insisted it was a trick, and the weapon still functioned hidden in the debris cloud, and ordered all ships to prepare defensive screens. The fleet opened fire with plasma cannons and missiles pulverizing lunar debris into smaller fragments, but no weapon fired back, and no defensive systems activated, and the moon was truly gone, destroyed by humans themselves. Tharvex ordered them to move forward, saying something was wrong, but they had come too far to turn back, and as the Vrelnox fleet entered Earth orbit, they found a planet that appeared defenseless, with no orbital stations or defensive satellites or fleet rising to meet them. The blue and green world spun silently below with city lights visible against the dark side, and Tharvex commanded sensors to scan for life signs asking where the humans were, and the report came back showing 7 billion human biosignatures on the planet's surface. Tharvex said to hail them and hear what excuse they offered for their inevitable surrender, and Admiral Patricia Morrison's face appeared on the view screen, with her expression calm. Patricia said that Tharvex had come a long way for nothing, and Tharvex ordered her to surrender the world, and they would be merciful, but resistance would turn the planet to ash. Patricia said Tharvex was not listening because she said he came for nothing, and there was no battle here and no last stand and no desperate defense, and Tharvex asked if that meant surrender. Patricia said no, and explained they just decided not to play the Vrelnox game, and Tharvex said human cities were below them, and people were trapped on that world, and one word would reduce civilization to rubble. Patricia challenged Tharvex to do it and fire on those cities and kill those people, and show the entire galaxy which was watching right now what the mighty Vrelnox hierarchy does to species that resist them and become mass murderers and become the very thing they claim to stand against. Tharvex hesitated, and in that hesitation the trap closed, because all across Earth, in cities and towns and rural areas and suburbs, humans gathered in public squares and parks, and looked up at the sky and began to transmit. The transmissions were not military messages or threats, but simple broadcasts in every language Earth had to offer, sent on every frequency the Vrelnox could receive, showing children singing and families having dinner and scientists working and artists creating and doctors healing and teachers educating. The broadcast showed the simple, ordinary life of a species refusing to be defined by military power alone and interwoven with. The Vrelnox battle fleet arrived at the outer edge of the Sol system with all the confidence of hunters who knew their prey was cornered, and High Commander Zethrex stood in the command center of the massive dreadnought called Inevitable Conquest, watching the tactical display with deep satisfaction. Zethrak ordered a report, and the sensor officer clicked back that all vessels were accounted for, and they were detecting minimal human ship presence with only 3 patrol vessels in the asteroid belt, and 2 frigates near Mars orbit, and 1 destroyer near Earth's moon, and no capital ships were detected anywhere. Zethrak's mandibles spread in what passed for a smile among its species and said, the humans were cowering on their homeworld hoping for mercy, and how predictable that was. And it ordered the helm to set course for Earth and told all ships to maintain battle formation, and they would surround the human planet and demand unconditional surrender. The fleet advanced with 32 warships moving in perfect formation toward the blue and green world that humans called home, and they passed Neptune's orbit, and then Uranus, seeing nothing but empty space and the occasional human mining station that had been hastily abandoned. The tactical officer spoke with uncertainty in its voice and said this seemed too easy, and asked where the human defenses were, and Zethrak said they were destroyed or hiding, and the humans knew they could not stand against the Vrelnoks, and humanity was a young species barely off their homeworld, so whatever military force they had was clearly overestimated. But as the fleet crossed Jupiter's orbit, something changed and the sensors began picking up strange readings, and the sensor officer reported multiple energy signatures in the asteroid belt, and they appeared to be satellites or defense platforms. Zethrak asked how many, and the answer came back as hundreds, and then the number changed to thousands, and they were everywhere spread throughout the belt in what looked like a defensive grid, and Zethrak asked if they were armed. The officer said it was unknown, but the platforms were broadcasting a signal that was encrypted and could not be decoded, and Zethrak studied the tactical display, seeing the massive field of objects scattered between Mars and Jupiter, and said it did not matter, because they were stationary targets. Zethrak ordered all ships to destroy the platforms as they passed and gave permission for free fire on any human installation within weapons range, and the Vrelnoks fleet opened fire with plasma cannons and missiles targeting the nearest satellites. And explosions bloomed in the asteroid belt as dozens of platforms were vaporized. But for every platform destroyed, 10 more appeared on the sensors, and in the command center beneath Earth's surface, Admiral Patricia Morrison watched the battle unfold with grim satisfaction and asked how many platforms they had lost. Nathan reported, 200 and counting, but the Vrelnoks were expending a lot of ordnance on them, and Patricia said good, because that was 200 fewer missiles the aliens would have to shoot at actual human ships, and she ordered Phase 2 to execute immediately. Across the asteroid belt, hidden among the millions of space rocks that had orbited the sun since the solar system formed, human ships began to move, and they had been waiting in silence with their reactors cold and their emissions masked to look like metallic asteroids. Captain Sarah Mitchell commanded the frigate Defiant, tucked into a crater on the surface of an asteroid, and her crew had been waiting for 8 hours breathing recycled air and running on minimal power, and the communications officer announced that Admiral Morrison's signal was received and all ships were weapons-free. Sarah allowed herself a fierce grin and told the helm to bring them to full power, and told Tactical to target the nearest Vrelnoks cruiser, and said they were going to introduce the aliens to an Earth tradition called an ambush. The Defiant's fusion reactor flared to life and the ship lifted from its hiding place, and all around the asteroid belt 18 human warships did the same, appearing as if by magic among the rocks and dust, and they had spent 3 days positioning themselves using the asteroid's metal content to mask their signatures. The Vrelnoks fleet, spread out in their hunting formation, suddenly found themselves surrounded, and Sarah ordered all ships to fire at will, and the human vessels unleashed everything they had, with missiles carrying fusion warheads and railgun rounds traveling at incredible speeds. But there was something new too, and it was directed energy weapons that Earth scientists had been developing in secret for 5 years, and the Vrelnoks had shields designed to deflect plasma and particle beams, but they were not prepared for weapons that used focused gravity waves to tear ships apart at the molecular level. The Vrelnoks cruiser that Sarah targeted shuddered as the Defiant's experimental weapon struck its shields, and the protective barrier held for 3 seconds and then failed catastrophically, and the gravity beam punched through the cruiser's hull, and the ship came apart like a toy in angry hands. Across the asteroid belt, chaos erupted, and the Vrelnoks fleet, expecting an easy conquest, found itself in a desperate fight for survival, and their numerical advantage meant nothing when human ships could appear from hiding and strike with devastating accuracy and disappear back into the asteroid field before return fire could be coordinated. On the inevitable conquest, Zethrak watched in disbelief as its fleet began to take casualties and demanded to know how the humans were doing this and where those ships came from, and the tactical officer said they had been hiding in the asteroids, using natural terrain as cover, and their weapons were technology the Vrelnox had never seen before. Zethrak ordered all ships to regroup into tight formation and not let the humans isolate them, and its mind raced, trying to adapt to this unexpected turn because the humans were not cowering but hunting. But regrouping proved harder than ordering. It done, and the human ships seemed to anticipate every move, striking at Vrelnox vessels that tried to close ranks and melting back into the asteroid belt before they could be engaged. And it was guerrilla warfare in space, and the Vrelnox had no counter for it. The tactical officer reported that they had lost 4 cruisers and 7 destroyers, and another 3 ships were heavily damaged, and its voice was high with stress, and Zethrak snarled that they would push forward and ordered all remaining ships to go full speed to Earth. Zethrak said they would bypass these ambushes and hold the human homeworld hostage, and once they controlled Earth, the human ships would have no choice but to surrender, and the Vrelnox fleet broke formation, abandoning their careful approach for a desperate charge toward the inner system. Patricia Morrison watched this happen and said they were running, and Nathan said all ships were heading straight for Earth. And Patricia said good because they were panicked and disorganized and angry, which were perfect conditions for making mistakes. She opened communications and told all human ships to fall back to position Omega, and let the Vrelnox reach Mars orbit because they would finish this, where they had home field advantage, and the human vessels disengaged, allowing the Vrelnox fleet to push past them. To Zethrak it looked like victory, and the fragile humans were retreating, unable to stop the hierarchy's advance, and Earth lay ahead undefended and vulnerable, and the fleet crossed into Mars orbit thinking they had won. But then they discovered the final surprise that humanity had prepared for them, and the thousands of satellites they had destroyed in the asteroid belt had not been defensive platforms at all, but decoys designed to waste Vrelnox ammunition and draw attention away from what was really happening. While the hierarchy's ships had been fighting in the belt, human engineers had been working frantically to complete something unprecedented in space warfare history, and the sensor officer's voice was barely a whisper, saying there was a massive energy buildup ahead, coming from Earth's moon. Zethrak ordered magnification, and the view screen showed Luna, but something was different, and the entire near side of the moon was glowing with blue and white light that grew brighter each second, and structures that had not existed a week ago covered the lunar surface. There were massive magnetic coils and power generators the size of cities, and at the center of it all was a weapon that humanity had reverse-engineered from captured alien technology and improved with human ingenuity, and Zethrak demanded to know what it was. Admiral Morrison's voice echoed across every Vrelnox ship in the fleet, and said that was humanity's answer to the invasion, and humans called it the Aegis Cannon, and Zethrak had come to the human home system expecting to find primitive creatures, cowering in fear, but instead found humans who had 3 days to prepare a welcome. Patricia said she would give Zethrak one chance to surrender and withdraw, and told him to take it because he would not get another chance, and Zethrak's mandibles clacked in rage and said humans did not dictate terms to the Vrelnox hierarchy. Zethrak ordered all ships to target the weapon and destroy it before it could fire. But the Vrelnox fleet was still scattered from their disorganized charge through the asteroid belt, and their ships were out of position and low on ammunition, and facing a weapon that was already fully charged. The Aegis cannon fired, and a beam of pure coherent energy powered by nuclear fusion reactors and focused through quantum-aligned magnetic fields lanced out from the lunar surface and struck the lead dreadnought, which was the inevitable conquest itself. The mighty Vrelnox flagship simply ceased to exist, and the beam burned. The Vigilant dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Kepler system, like a meteor appearing from nowhere, and its hull was covered in scars from a dozen small battles, and Captain Benjamin Hayes stood on the bridge with his gray eyes locked on the tactical display that showed the Discovery running for its life from 3 Vrelnox destroyers. Benjamin asked how long until they could intercept, and Lieutenant Karen Foster at the helm said 8 minutes at full burn. But the Discovery's shields were down to 30% and failing, and they would not last another 5 minutes, and Benjamin said then they would have to get there in 4 minutes. He ordered everyone to battle stations and told Tactical to prepare firing solutions on all 3 destroyers the moment they were in range, and told Engineering to take power from everything that was not essential and put it into engines and weapons. And the Vigilant surged forward, pushing its fusion drive harder than it was designed to go. Benjamin watched the distance close on his screen, and his hands gripped the armrests of his command chair tight, and he knew the Vrelnox had been bullying smaller species for months now, confident that nobody would stand up to them, and it was time. Someone reminded them what happens when you push too hard. The communications officer said they were being hailed by the lead Vrelnox destroyer, and Benjamin told him to put it through. And the view screen showed a Vrelnox commander with its mandibles spread wide in aggression, and it said that the human vessel was interfering in Vrelnox territory and should withdraw immediately or be destroyed. Benjamin leaned forward in his chair and said this was Captain Benjamin Hayes of the Earth vessel Vigilant, and the Discovery was engaged in humanitarian rescue operations, and the Vrelnox were targeting refugees and the ship protecting them, and he ordered them to stand down. The Vrelnox made clicking sounds that might have been laughter, and said that humans were always so sentimental about lesser species, and one fragile little human ship could not stand against 3 destroyers, and if Benjamin left now, they would allow him to flee with his life. Benjamin said he would take his chances and nodded to his communications officer to cut the transmission, and then told Tactical that the moment they were in range, to target the lead destroyer's shield generators with everything they had. And he wanted to see how confident the Vrelnox were after getting bloodied. The Vigilant closed the distance in 3 minutes and 40 seconds, and the Vrelnox destroyers were surprised by how fast the human ship moved, and they started to turn to face this new threat. But that moment of surprise was exactly what Benjamin needed. He gave the order to fire, and the Vigilant's missile pods opened up and unleashed 60 missiles, and each one carried a fusion warhead, and they streaked across the void toward the Vrelnox ships, and the alien shields flared bright as they tried to absorb the impacts, but human weapons had been designed for one purpose, which was overwhelming: concentrated firepower. The lead destroyer's forward shields failed under the attack, and the last dozen missiles punched through the barrier and slammed into the ship's hull and detonated, and explosions bloomed across the Vrelnox vessel's front section, crippling its main weapons and leaving it floating dead in space. Karen reported a direct hit and said the lead destroyer was disabled, and her voice was full of satisfaction. But Benjamin warned her not to celebrate yet because the other 2 destroyers were turning around and coming at them, and he opened a channel to Lisa on the Discovery. Lisa's voice crackled through the static and said they could hear him, and that was beautiful shooting. And Benjamin told her to get the refugees out of there because the Vigilant would keep the Vrelnox busy, and Lisa said they could not leave him to face 2 destroyers alone. Benjamin said yes, they could and they would, and that was an order, because those refugees were counting on her to get them to safety, and there was a pause, and then Lisa's voice came back tight with emotion and said, understood, and wished him good hunting and thanked him. The Discovery broke away from the battle zone and accelerated toward the edge of the system, where it could jump to faster than light speed, and the 2 remaining Vrelnox destroyers started to chase it, but Benjamin was not going to let that happen. He ordered Tactical to target the second destroyer's engines and told all forward batteries to fire at will. And the Vigilant's railguns opened up, throwing tungsten projectiles at a fraction of light speed, and the Vrelnox shields absorbed most of the hits, but the sheer force of the bombardment made them abandon their pursuit. Karen warned that both destroyers were now focusing on the Vigilant, and she was reading massive power buildups in their plasma cannons, and Benjamin ordered evasive pattern Delta 7 and told her to keep them moving, because the enemy could not hit what they could not track. The Vigilant dove and twisted through space, and its smaller size and better maneuverability let it dodge most of the Vrelnox fire. But Benjamin knew it was only a matter of time before they got hit, because his ship was outnumbered and outgunned, and every shot that connected brought them closer to destruction. The tactical officer called out that shields were at 60% and armor plating was holding, but there were hull breaches on decks 4 and 5, and Benjamin ordered those sections sealed and asked how long until the Discovery could jump to faster than light. The answer was 3 minutes, and Benjamin said then they would hold for 3 minutes, and his voice was calm and steady, and he told all batteries to concentrate fire on the 3rd destroyer, because if they could disable one more ship, the odds would get a lot better. The bridge shook hard as a plasma bolt got through their defenses and scorched the Vigilant's hull, and alarms were wailing and damage reports were flooding in. But Benjamin ignored them all and kept his focus entirely on the tactical display. Karen announced that the Discovery was jumping and they were away safe, and Benjamin said good. And now it was time to get themselves out of this mess, and he told the helm to go full reverse and told Tactical to fire everything they had left because he wanted so much ordnance in space that the Vrelnox would not know which way to turn. The Vigilant unleashed its remaining arsenal in a desperate gambit to cover their retreat, and missiles and railgun rounds filled the void between the human ship and its pursuers, and the Vrelnox destroyers slowed down because their commanders were cautious about pushing forward through such concentrated fire. That moment of hesitation was all Benjamin needed, and he gave the order to jump, and the Vigilance faster-than-light drive engaged, and the ship vanished in a flash of twisted space, leaving the Vrelnox destroyers alone with their crippled sister ship and the bitter knowledge that humans were not as easy to kill as they had assumed. On the Vrelnox homeworld, a military leader named High Commander Zethrak received the report of the battle and was barely able to control its rage, and its body plates flared with aggressive colors as it spoke to the military council. Zethrak said that 2 destroyers had been fought to a standstill by a single human patrol ship, and one of their vessels was crippled, and this was unacceptable, and a junior officer carefully suggested that the humans had fought with unexpected fury, and their weapons, while primitive, were used with considerable tactical skill, and their commander showed no fear even when facing overwhelming odds. Zethrak's mandibles clacked together violently and said skill did not matter, because humans were prey animals playing at war, and it ordered a battle fleet sent to the human home system, with 10 heavy cruisers and 20 destroyers and 2 dreadnoughts, and they would show the humans and the entire council what happens when lesser species dare to resist. The junior officer said the council might object to such an aggressive response, but Zethrak said the council was weak, and they had denied humans full status, which meant as far as galactic law was concerned, humanity was still a protected species. But protection required submission, and the humans had given up that protection by attacking Vrelnox vessels. The junior officer asked what would happen if the humans resisted, and Zethrak laughed in a harsh clicking way, and said then they would demonstrate to the entire galaxy what happens to fragile creatures who forget their place. Admiral Patricia. Morrison received the intelligence report 6 hours later, and her face stayed calm as she read the details of the Vrelnox fleet leaving their home system, but inside her mind was racing through possibilities and scenarios. Nathan said grimly that 32 capital ships were heading their way, with an arrival time of 72 hours, and humanity had 18 functional warships in the entire fleet, and half of them were patrol vessels like the Vigilant, and they could not win this fight. Patricia agreed that they could not win a conventional engagement, but asked who said anything about fighting conventionally, and she turned to her strategic planning team and told them to get everything they had on Vrelnox tactics and ship capabilities and command structure, and to contact Professor Helen Carter at MIT and tell her they needed every combat simulation she had been running for the past year, even the crazy ones. Nathan said that even with perfect tactics the numbers did not lie because 32 ships against 18 was impossible, but Patricia smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression, and she asked Nathan if he had ever studied Earth history, and specifically human military campaigns. Nathan said some, and Patricia said then he knew that humanity had The Galactic Council chamber was bigger than anything Daniel Carter had ever seen in his life, and the ceiling showed stars and planets moving in real time, like a giant screen above everyone's heads, and Daniel stood at the human platform holding the railing tight because his hands were shaking a little bit from nervousness, and he listened to the alien ambassador speak about humans, and none of it was good. The Vrelnox ambassador looked like a giant insect with too many legs, and when it talked, its mouth parts clicked together, making sounds that the translation device turned into words that Daniel could understand, and those words made him angry, but he kept his face calm like he had been trained to do, and the Vrelnox was saying that humans were too weak and too fragile to join the galactic community. The alien clicked its mandibles again and said that humans break their bones from simple falls, and they drown in water, and they cannot even breathe without oxygen, and it asked why anyone should give humans trade rights when they need special suits just to visit most planets, and other aliens in the room made sounds of agreement, and Daniel felt his aide, Amy Rogers, tense up beside him. Then a tall reptile alien stood up, and its scales were the color of copper pennies, and it said that its people had been watching humans for 30 years, and all they saw was humans fighting each other and destroying their own planet, and dying, so young that they barely learned anything before death took them away, and it wanted to know what such creatures could possibly offer to the galaxy. Another alien that looked like a floating jellyfish with glowing lights rippled through different colors, and the translator said this meant the alien felt contempt, and it said that human ships were too slow, and human weapons were just bullets, and missiles and humans had no shields or fast engines or neural networks, and the jellyfish alien suggested that humans should be kept in their home system for another 1,000 years until they grew up enough to join civilized space. The vote happened, and Daniel watched the results appear on a holographic screen, and the numbers made his heart sink, because 847 aliens voted to deny humanity, and only 12 voted yes, and 34 did not vote at all, and that meant humans were rejected and would not become full members of the Galactic Council. After the meeting ended, the Vrelnox ambassador walked over to Daniel with what might have been a smile on its insect face, and it said not to take the rejection personally, because humans showed promise, but they were simply too fragile for the hard work of being part of galactic society, and maybe in time humans would overcome their biological problems. Daniel looked right into the alien's compound eyes and said that humans had survived ice ages and plagues and 2 world wars, and walked on their moon with primitive technology. And he said that being fragile is not the same as being weak. And sometimes, fragility teaches lessons that strength never could, but the Vrelnox just clicked its mandibles in a dismissive way and walked off. Amy stepped closer, and her voice was tight with controlled anger, and she asked what they were going to do now, because everything they came for was denied, and all the treaties and trade routes and technology exchanges were gone. And Daniel told her to contact Captain Benjamin Hayes on the ship Endeavor and tell him they were going home. Daniel also told Amy to send a secret message to Admiral Patricia Morrison at Fleet Command and tell her that the Council had made their decision and humans should prepare themselves. And Amy asked what they should prepare for, and Daniel said that the aliens were right about one thing, which was that humans were behind in technology, but they made a big mistake. Amy wanted to know what mistake, and Daniel explained that the aliens assumed humans would always be behind them. But they did not understand human nature, because humans never accept limitations, and they always find ways to overcome them. And Amy nodded slowly, starting to understand. 3 months went by, and trouble started in the outer rim of the galaxy, where the Vrelnox were taking over planets that belonged to smaller and weaker species, and the Galactic Council did nothing to stop them, because the big, powerful species controlled the Council, and they did not care about the little ones. Commander Lisa Martinez sat in the captain's chair of a survey ship called Discovery, and she was supposed to be mapping asteroids, but her sensor screen showed something very different, and she told her tactical officer Ryan Phillips to check the readings again to make sure they were real. Ryan worked at his console and confirmed what Lisa was seeing, and he said there was debris from weapons fire and multiple Vrelnox military ships in the system, and there was something else too, because he was detecting faint life signs on the 3rd moon of a gas giant planet. Lisa asked how faint, and Ryan said maybe 20 or 30 people. And the biological signs matched the Peltharian species, and Lisa felt her jaw get tight, because Peltharians were peaceful traders and artists who never made weapons in their home. World had been taken over by the Vrelnox 6 weeks ago, and the Council had done absolutely nothing. Lisa asked if they could reach the refugees, and Ryan said it would be risky, because there were 3 Vrelnox destroyers in the system, and if those ships detected the Discovery, then there would be trouble, and Lisa said the Vrelnox would detect them anyway, once they started rescue operations. She told the navigation officer to plot a course to the moon, and told communications to send a coded message to Fleet Command, letting them know what they found and what they were doing. And Ryan hesitated, and said that the Council had forbidden anyone from interfering with Vrelnox expansion, and if they rescued these people, it could be considered an act of war. Lisa stood up from her chair with her decision made, and she said that the Council also had laws against genocide, and those people on the moon needed help, and the Discovery was the only ship close enough to provide it. And besides, humans did not leave people to die just because it was inconvenient. The Discovery changed course and accelerated toward the moon, and in the depths of space, the 3 Vrelnox destroyers began to notice what was happening and started moving to intercept. Back on Earth, deep underground in the Rocky Mountains, Admiral Patricia Morrison stood in front of a huge holographic display that showed the entire known galaxy, with red dots marking where Vrelnox ships were located, and blue dots showing human vessels, and there were not nearly enough blue dots. Her Chief of Staff, Colonel Nathan Brooks, stood beside her with a data pad and told her that the Discovery had started rescue operations and 3 Vrelnox destroyers were moving to stop them, and Commander Martinez estimated she had 40 minutes before the enemy ships were close enough to fire weapons. Patricia asked what human ships were nearby, and Nathan said the patrol ship Vigilant was 3 hours away at maximum speed, and the Endeavor was 6 hours out, and nothing else was close enough to matter, and Patricia asked about Vrelnox reinforcements. Nathan said the nearest Vrelnox backup was 12 hours away, but if humans intervened and fired on Vrelnox ships, then the Council would consider it aggression, and humanity would be alone against the biggest military force in the galaxy. And Patricia was quiet for a long moment, thinking hard. She thought about how the Council had dismissed humanity and called them fragile, and she thought about the Peltharian refugees hiding on that moon waiting to die, and she finally said to contact Commander Martinez and tell her that the Vigilant was coming and was authorized to use any means necessary to protect the Discovery and the refugees. Then Patricia told Nathan to send a priority message to all fleet commanders and activate something called Protocol Sentinel. And Nathan's eyes went wide because Protocol Sentinel was a full defensive mobilization, and if they activated it there was no going back, and the Council would see it as preparation for war. Patricia said that the Vrelnox had been at war with decency for months and the Council had done nothing. And if the aliens wanted to see human fragility as weakness, then let them. But they were about to learn that the most dangerous creatures are the ones who know how vulnerable they are and fight twice as hard because of it.